I always thought the most painful moment of my life would be watching my son die from cancer. I was wrong. The most painful moment was standing outside his hospital room door as my daughter-in-law blocked the entrance, looked me straight in the eyes, and said the words that shattered my world. "You can't come in, Opal. Thaddeus doesn't want to see you. Not now. Not ever again." My hands trembled, the persistent numbness in my fingers intensifying as I clutched the small photo album I'd brought, our fishing trips to Lake Michigan, 30 summers of memories. Behind her I could hear the faint beeping of monitors. My son was dying just 15 feet away, and a woman half my age stood between us with a diamond-studded watch glittering on her wrist, the same watch that appeared after she convinced Thaddeus to cash out the life insurance policy I'd maintained faithfully for 30 years. "But the nurse called me," I whispered, my voice breaking. "She said he was asking for his mother." Freya's smile never reached her eyes. "That was the medication talking. Dr. Kavanaugh agrees you're too upsetting for him right now." I knew that was a lie. Just yesterday, Dr. Kavanaugh had taken my hand and said, "Your presence is the best medicine we can give him now, Opal." As Freya closed the door in my face, 3 questions burned in my mind. Why was she really keeping me from my dying son? What had she told him to make him reject his own mother? And what was in the mysterious sealed letter Thaddeus had pressed into my hands 4 months earlier, his eyes intense as he whispered, "Only open this if things go terribly wrong, Mom. If you're ever locked out of my life, break the seal." What Freya didn't know as she stood there smugly blocking my way was that locked in my antique secretary desk at home, the one with the hidden panel where I'd stored Christmas presents when Thaddeus was a child, was evidence that would not only get me back to my son's bedside, but would unravel everything she had so carefully orchestrated. Before I reveal the shocking contents of that sealed letter, and how I used it to expose the web of lies, financial manipulation, and betrayal my daughter-in-law had been weaving for years, subscribe to her Silver Truth for daily stories of elderly women finding justice when everyone underestimated them. In my case, that truth was sealed with wax and hidden in a desk drawer, waiting like a time bomb for the exact moment when I would need it most. The antique secretary desk where I'd hidden Thaddeus's letter was the same one where I'd graded thousands of English papers over my 31-year teaching career. It stood in the corner of my living room like a sentinel, watching over me through every phase of my life. My marriage to Callum, raising Thaddeus alone after Callum's sudden heart attack in 1994, and now my retirement years, that should have been peaceful but had become a battleground I never anticipated. As I drove home from the hospital that day, tears blurring my vision, I knew the moment had come to break the seal that my son had so carefully placed. What I didn't realize was that opening that envelope wouldn't just change my future. It would expose a betrayal so calculated, so precise in its execution, that it would leave everyone wondering if they ever really knew Freya at all. My name is Opal Eleanor Winston. I've lived in the same 2-bedroom bungalow on Maple Street since 1971, the one Callum and I bought when Thaddeus was just starting elementary school. Callum worked at the steel mill while I taught English at Roosevelt High, saving every extra penny for Thaddeus's education fund. Even after the mill closed in 1983, forcing us to live on my teacher's salary alone, we never touched that college money. I can still remember the exact moment we decided to buy this house. It was spring of 1971, and Thaddeus was running through the empty living room, his sneakers echoing on the hardwood floors. "Mom, Mom! Look at the tree in the backyard. It's perfect for a tire swing." His voice carried that pure childhood excitement that makes your heart squeeze with love. Callum had squeezed my hand and whispered, "This is home, Opal. I can feel it." We stretched ourselves thin on the mortgage payments for years, but we never regretted it. My husband passed in 1994 from a sudden heart attack, leaving me to manage everything alone. On that terrible morning, I remember the paramedics rushing in as I stood frozen in my flannel nightgown, the one Thaddeus had given me for Christmas 2 years earlier. The younger paramedic had gently guided me to the kitchen while they worked on Callum, but I already knew from their eyes what the outcome would be. "Mum, I've got you," my son had whispered at the funeral, his arms steady around my shoulders despite his own grief. The first months after Callum's death were a fog of paperwork and lonely nights. I found myself talking to his empty chair each evening, telling him about my day as if he might answer. Thaddeus called every single night at 8 p.m. sharp for an entire year, never once missing that check-in. Even when he was in graduate school with deadlines looming, he made those calls, often falling asleep on the phone as I hummed the lullabies I'd sung to him as a child. And I had always been there for him too. I was there when he graduated summa cum laude in 1991, when he earned his PhD in 1997, and when he landed his dream position as department chair at the university. I'd contributed $24,280 from my retirement savings for the down payment on his Tudor-style home in 2001, the same year he married Freya. The bank wanted to know why I was withdrawing such a significant portion of my retirement funds, and I remember telling the manager, because my son's happiness is the best investment I could possibly make. I still remember Thaddeus's wedding day, how handsome he looked in the charcoal suit we'd chosen together. "Mum, I wouldn't be standing here without you," he'd said while we danced. Freya had watched from across the room, beautiful in her designer gown and smiling that perfect smile that never quite reached her eyes. For years, our Sunday dinners were sacred. Thaddeus and Freya coming to my home for my pot roast made from Callum's mother's recipe. I still used the same ceramic Dutch oven we'd received as a wedding gift in 1957. Those evenings, we'd reminisce about fishing trips to our family lake house in Michigan, the one Callum's parents had left us, which Thaddeus and I now co-owned. The first sign that something had changed came 3 years ago, when Freya began suggesting they were too busy for weekly dinners. "We have such demanding social obligations now that Thaddeus is department chair," she'd explained, her tone making it clear these obligations didn't include me. Then came the missed birthdays, the shortened holiday visits, the way Freya would answer when I called Thaddeus's cell phone. "He's in meetings all day, Opal," she'd say, though I could sometimes hear his voice in the background. I told myself not to be sensitive. Adult children have their own lives, after all. But when Thaddeus was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer last April, something deeper shifted. "Mum, I need you," Thaddeus had said from his hospital bed that first terrible week, his fingers wrapping around mine despite the IV lines. For a month I was there daily, keeping meticulous notes on his medications, symptoms, and doctor's comments in my leather-bound journal. That's when I noticed Freya watching me with growing irritation. "You don't need to write down everything, Opal," she'd said one afternoon. "The doctors have all this in their computers." But Dr. Kavanagh had specifically praised my detailed observations. "Mrs. Winston, your notes helped us catch that medication interaction. Not everything makes it into our system," he'd said while Freya stared out the window, her jaw tightening visibly. I began finding my chair moved farther from Thaddeus's bed each time I arrived. The photos I'd brought to cheer him, fishing at the lake house, his college graduation, mysteriously disappeared from his nightstand, replaced by newer ones that didn't include me. But what I didn't realise then was why Freya had been asking so many questions about the lake house deed, or why she'd suddenly become so interested in Thaddeus's life insurance policy, the one I'd kept paid faithfully for 30 years, even during the months when I'd had to choose between new shoes and the premium payments. What happened next revealed how long this betrayal had been planned and how desperately Freya needed me out of the picture before Thaddeus drew his final breath. As Thaddeus's condition worsened, Freya's mask slipped further. One afternoon I arrived to find her speaking to a nurse outside his room. "His mother gets confused easily," I overheard her saying. "She means well, but she's been mixing up his medications at home. We need to monitor her visits." The nurse nodded sympathetically, then noticed me standing there. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty as she realized I'd heard everything. That evening, when I tried to correct a mistake on Thaddeus's chart, they'd listed his medication allergy incorrectly. Freya interrupted. Opal gets details mixed up sometimes. The doctors have the correct information. Dr. Leonard, who'd been reviewing the chart, looked between us uncertainly. Actually, Mrs. Winston pointed out this allergy during our first consultation. Let me double-check our records. When he confirmed I was right, Freya smiled tightly. Lucky guess. She's been so stressed lately forgetting things. Last week she couldn't even remember where she parked at the grocery store. That had happened once, on a day when my peripheral neuropathy was flaring badly, making every step painful. I'd mentioned it to Thaddeus in private, never imagining Freya would weaponize it. Then came the family meeting about Thaddeus's care plan. I arrived precisely at 2:00 p.m., the time we'd agreed upon, only to discover they'd started at 1:30. We tried calling, Freya said, though my phone showed no missed calls. We made the important decisions already, but you can stay if you want. 6 weeks into Thaddeus's treatment, I received a call from Mrs. Patel at First National Bank. Mrs. Winston, I wanted to verify your authorization of the change to your account access, she said carefully. What change? I asked, confused. Someone attempted to add a secondary signer to your accounts yesterday. The request form had your signature, but our verification process flagged it for review. The signature wasn't mine. I'd been at the hospital all day holding Thaddeus's hand through a particularly difficult round of treatment. A week later, Freya brought paperwork to the hospital while Thaddeus was sleeping. These are just updates to Thaddeus's documents, she explained, sliding papers across the small bedside table. Standard procedure for his university pension and the property holdings. He asked me to have you sign them. When I said I'd forgotten my reading glasses and would review them at home, her smile faltered. It's really urgent, Opal. The benefits office needs these processed immediately. I insisted on taking them home, but when I finally examined them that evening, I discovered they included transferred documents for the lake house, moving my co-ownership entirely to Thaddeus's name. There was also a form authorizing changes to Thaddeus's life insurance beneficiaries. As Thaddeus grew weaker, Freya began rewriting our family history entirely. When his colleagues from the university visited, she directed conversations away from any mention of his childhood or our family traditions. Thaddeus was always focused on his academic future, she told them, as if his life had begun in graduate school when they'd met. He was never interested in sentimentality. This about my son, who had saved every birthday card I'd ever given him, who still used the fountain pen his father had given him for his 16th birthday. When his department organised a tribute display about his academic career, the timeline Freya provided began with his doctoral work. The photographs included none from before their marriage. His undergraduate achievements, the scholarships I'd helped him apply for, the honours thesis I'd typed for him on my manual typewriter late into the night, all erased. Even in conversations with medical staff, she referred to herself as his only family, making decisions without consulting me. When I tried to share information about his childhood illnesses, information relevant to his treatment, she interrupted. Thaddeus was never hospitalized as a child, she insisted, though he'd had pneumonia at age 7, so severe he'd spent 2 weeks in the hospital. I still had the get-well cards his classmates had made, stored in the same memory box as his first tooth, and the honour roll certificates he'd earned every semester. Many of us have experienced that hollow feeling when someone younger looks right through us, as if our decades of experience have made us invisible rather than valuable. We recognise that particular smile they give, the one that says, "I'm humouring you but not actually listening." What they fail to understand about our generation is that we weathered far worse than their dismissal. We survived economic recessions that made today's financial challenges look like minor inconveniences. We managed households without the technologies they take for granted. We built careers when the workplace wasn't designed to include us. That's exactly why I began documenting everything in a separate journal. One I kept in my purse rather than at Thaddeus's bedside. Every dismissive comment, every unauthorized decision, every time Freya spoke about me, rather than to me in my presence. The entries grew longer each week, but I wasn't yet sure what I would do with this record. What they didn't know was that Thaddeus had already placed something in my safekeeping, something that would become the key to unravelling everything Freya had carefully orchestrated. If you've ever had your concerns dismissed because of your age, tap the like button now. It's our way of standing together against those who underestimate us. And in my case, that truth was about to emerge, in a way no one expected. The moment everything changed came on a Tuesday morning in November. I'd arrived at the hospital to find Freya blocking the doorway to Thaddeus's room, her designer handbag dangling from her arm. "You can't come in, Opal. He doesn't want to see you," she said, her voice practiced in false sympathy. "But the nurse called yesterday. She said he was asking for me," I replied, my voice barely a whisper, my fingers tingling painfully from my neuropathy as I clutched the photo album I'd brought, pictures of our fishing trips to Lake Michigan. "That was the medication talking," Freya said coolly, checking her diamond-studded watch, the one that had appeared after Thaddeus cashed out the life insurance policy I'd maintained for decades. "He's resting now, and seeing you will just upset him. Dr. Kavanagh agrees it's best to keep things calm." I knew Dr. Kavanagh had said no such thing. Just days earlier he'd told me, "Your presence is the best medicine we can give him now, Opal." As Freya closed the door in my face, something inside me shifted. The hurt and confusion crystallized into clarity. This wasn't about Thaddeus's care. It was about ensuring I wasn't present for whatever was happening behind that door. I returned home and sat at my kitchen table, the maple one where Thaddeus had done his homework every night throughout his childhood. With trembling fingers, I walked to my secretary desk and slid open the hidden panel where I'd placed the sealed envelope Thaddeus had given me 4 months earlier. "Only open it if you have to, Mom," he'd said, his eyes holding mine with an intensity I hadn't fully understood then. "If things go the way I hope, you'll never need to break this seal." I carefully broke the university department wax seal and unfolded his letter. As I read Thaddeus's words, my back straightened. My breathing steadied. The constant pain in my extremities seemed to recede as a different kind of sensation took over. Determination. "Dear Mom, if you're reading this, it means things have gotten bad in ways I hoped would never happen. I've asked you to hold this letter because you're the one person I trust without question, the one constant in my life from my first memory to my last." When the diagnosis came, Freya and I handled it differently. You saw that. What you didn't see were the conversations behind closed doors, the plans being made without my full consent. 3 weeks ago, I discovered Freya has been meeting with a real estate developer about the lake house. She found a loophole. If I die while the property is still partially in your name, she has no automatic claim to it. But if I were to transfer it fully to my name before I go, it becomes part of my estate, which she controls. She's also been pushing me to consolidate our finances, including the security fund I set up for you after Dad died. I've been resisting, but it's getting harder as the medication makes it difficult to stay alert. Mum, I need you to know I would never cut you out of my final days. If you're being kept away, it isn't by my choice. In the second envelope is a notarized statement. I had my colleague Clayton from the law department help me prepare. It clarifies my wishes regarding your access to me, my estate directives, and most importantly, evidence of Freya's attempts to manipulate my estate during my illness. Clayton has the originals in his office safe. He's been recording our conversations with my consent. Freya doesn't know. Call Clayton at the number below. Tell him the professor needs his research notes. He'll understand. I'm so sorry, Mum. I thought I knew her. I thought I'd built a family as strong as the one you and Dad gave me. All my love, Thaddeus. So many of us have experienced that pivotal moment when the fog of confusion suddenly clears, revealing the painful truth we've been trying not to see. That moment when we realize our accommodating nature, our lifelong habit of making peace, has been mistaken for weakness. They mistake our patience for acceptance, our consideration for vulnerability. What they fail to understand is that our generation perfected the art of strategic patience long before they were born. I realized the meticulous record-keeping habits they'd mocked were about to become my most powerful weapon. The detailed notes in my journal, the financial records I'd kept since 1968, the careful organization of every important document from Thaddeus's life, all of it would now serve a purpose they never anticipated. The letter revealed that Thaddeus had appointed a trusted colleague as his legal advocate, but I still needed to retrieve his personal journal from the bottom drawer of his Home Office desk. A journal that documented every manipulation Freya had attempted during his illness. Professor Clayton Whitaker's office at the University Law Department was lined with leather-bound books that reminded me of the literature classics I had taught for decades. He was younger than I expected, perhaps early 50s, with kind eyes behind scholarly glasses. Thaddeus was more than a colleague, he explained, setting a cup of tea before me in a proper china cup. He was my friend. When he came to me with his concerns, I was legally and morally obligated to help. What exactly did he suspect Freya was doing? I asked, clutching my handbag with its precisely organized contents, Thaddeus's letter, my medication list, and the small notebook where I'd documented every instance of Freya's strange behavior. Thaddeus believed Freya was manipulating his medical care to isolate him from you and others who might question her financial decisions, Clayton said carefully. He had evidence she was meeting with real estate developers about properties that weren't solely hers to sell, including making promises about the lake house. Clayton showed me recordings of phone calls between Freya and various financial entities, attempting to access accounts where she wasn't an authorized user. Most disturbingly, he had evidence she'd falsified documents with my forged signature. Together, we developed a careful strategy. I would continue appearing acquiescent while Clayton prepared legal documentation to ensure my access to Thaddeus and protect the assets Freya was targeting. I recalled my mother's words from decades ago. Opal, sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous. They're the ones listening, learning, and planning. For 3 days, I made calculated moves. I called the hospital regularly, expressing concern but not anger when denied access. I left tearful voicemails for Freya, creating the impression of a woman resigned to defeat. "Please, Freya," I said in one message, deliberately making my voice waver. "I just want to say goodbye to my son. Call me when you can." Meanwhile, Clayton was setting legal gears in motion that would change everything. He filed emergency petitions with the court, gathered statements from medical personnel, and consulted with a forensic handwriting expert about the forged documents. "Patience now will yield results later," he reminded me when I felt my resolve weakening. "Freya believes she's won. That overconfidence will be her undoing." The pieces were in place. We were about to reveal truths that would leave Freya speechless. What I did next would forever change the power dynamic that Freya thought she had so carefully constructed. And it began with a single phone call to the hospital administrator. Clayton had assembled an impressive legal portfolio, power of attorney documents Thaddeus had prepared granting medical decisions jointly to Freya and me, amendments to his will protecting my financial security, and most critically, transcripts of recorded conversations between Freya and someone named Hayes discussing accelerated estate planning once Thaddeus was too medicated to ask questions. We also had statements from Dr. Kavanagh and Dr. Leonard confirming they had never expressed concerns about my mental faculties or requested limited visitation. The hospital's head of patient advocacy, a woman named Maxine who'd been in the position for 27 years, reviewed our evidence with growing concern. "This is extremely serious," she said, her experienced eyes scanning the documentation. "Patient rights and family access are foundations of our care philosophy." Before confronting Freya, I made one last attempt at reconciliation. I called her cell phone directly. Freya, I understand Thaddeus is very ill, and this is a difficult time for everyone, I said carefully. But I need to see my son. Surely we can find a way to support each other through this. Her response was cold and final. Opal, I've already explained that Thaddeus doesn't want visitors right now. Please respect his wishes and stop calling. You're just creating additional stress for everyone. With that final rejection, the last bridge was burned. It was time to act. There comes a moment when we must decide between keeping peace and demanding respect. A moment when we recognize that allowing someone to mistreat us isn't kindness. It's surrender. Our generation knows the value of timing, of waiting for the perfect moment to act. We didn't survive decades of challenges by being impulsive or unnecessarily confrontational. That's why I chose to arrive at the hospital with Clayton during Freya's daily afternoon coffee break. This timing wasn't accidental, it was strategic, ensuring that hospital administration could confirm my legal rights before she returned. Maxine from Patient Advocacy personally escorted us to Thaddeus's floor, where the head nurse Willa reviewed our documentation carefully. These are legitimate legal documents, Willa confirmed. Mrs. Winston has joint medical power of attorney and unrestricted visitation rights. As predicted, Freya was absent, giving us precious minutes with Thaddeus. When I entered his room, his eyes fluttered open. "Mom," he whispered, reaching weakly for my hand. "You came back." "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," I replied, using our old family phrase. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You got my letter." "I did, sweetheart. Everything's being taken care of. You just rest now." When Freya returned 30 minutes later, she found me seated beside Thaddeus, gently moistening his lips with a sponge. Clayton stood near the window, his legal portfolio open on the small table. Her expression shifted from shock to controlled anger. What's going on? Visiting hours were changed. Not for immediate family with medical power of attorney, Willa said firmly, especially not when the patient has been asking for them. Freya's eyes darted between us, calculating. There must be some mistake. Thaddeus has been very clear about wanting to keep things calm and quiet. "Freya," I interrupted, my voice steadier than I'd thought possible. "I've read the letter." 5 simple words. I watched them land like precision strikes, her face draining of colour. "What letter?" she asked, but her voice betrayed her. Clayton stepped forward, introducing himself formally. "Mrs. Winston, I'm Professor Clayton Whitaker from the University Law Department. I have here the original notarized statement from Thaddeus Winston regarding his wishes for family access, estate management, and evidence of unauthorized attempts to manipulate his affairs during his illness." Freya's composure cracked. "You don't understand. Thaddeus wasn't thinking clearly. Someone needed to take control of things, to make decisions while there was still time." "Those decisions weren't yours alone to make," I said quietly. What Freya didn't know was that we'd already contacted the district attorney's office about the forged documents, and that her meeting yesterday with Hayes Lehman from Lakeshore Development had been recorded by Clayton's private investigator. For every dignity violation Freya had inflicted, justice created perfect symmetry. Where she had told medical staff I was confused and forgetful, Dr. Kavanagh now formally documented in Thaddeus's chart. Mrs. Winston's detailed record-keeping has been invaluable to our treatment plan. Her cognitive function and memory are exceptional. Where she had excluded me from the family care meeting, Maxine now instituted a new protocol. All significant care discussions must include both medical power of attorney holders with documentation of notification. Where she had publicly humiliated me by suggesting I couldn't be trusted with medication information, Willa now consulted me directly about Thaddeus's comfort measures, stating clearly, "Mrs. Winston's knowledge of her son's preferences is our best guide for his care." For each financial manipulation, justice was equally precise. The attempted forgery of my signature on bank documents resulted in a formal fraud investigation, with the bank placing temporary holds on all joint accounts Freya managed. Her unauthorized negotiations about the Lake House property triggered a cease and desist order to Hayes Lehman and Lakeshore Development, explicitly stating they had been negotiating for property without legal standing. The attempt to change Thaddeus's life insurance beneficiaries without proper authorization led the University Benefits Office to implement enhanced verification protocols, with all future changes requiring in-person verification. And for every attempt to erase my identity as Thaddeus's mother. Where Freya had removed our family photos, Thaddeus's room now held a digital frame cycling through images from his entire life. Fishing at the lake house, his graduation with me by his side, holiday gatherings with Callum before his passing. Where she had written me out of his academic biography, Clayton arranged for the university to create a scholarship in Thaddeus's name, with the official description acknowledging the dedicated support of his mother, Opal Winston, whose sacrifices as a career educator made his academic journey possible. Where she had called herself his only family, the hospital visitor log now formally recognized me as Opal Winston, mother and joint medical decision-maker. What would you have done if someone tried to erase your lifetime of contributions and love? Our community values your wisdom in the comments below. Remember, what might look like defeat to others is often just our strategic patience at work. In Thaddeus's final days, I never left his side. His college friend Weston drove in from Milwaukee when I called. His colleagues from the university came in shifts. His pastor sat with us and prayed. Through it all, Freya was nowhere to be seen, though Clayton assured me she'd been informed she could visit during designated hours. She's been advised by her own counsel to cooperate fully, was all he would say, his expressions suggesting the conversation had not been pleasant. The nursing staff created a small cot for me beside Thaddeus's bed, bringing me fresh linens each morning and ensuring I had meals. Willa brought me a soft blue cardigan from the gift shop when she noticed me shivering one night. "You need to take care of yourself too, Mrs. Winston," she said gently. "Thaddeus would want that." Those final 3 days with my son were both agonizing and precious. We existed in a quiet bubble of love, with Thaddeus drifting in and out of consciousness. During his lucid moments, we spoke of small, important things: his first bike ride without training wheels, the garden we'd planted together the summer after Callum died, the way the light hit the lake at sunset from the dock of our Michigan house. "Remember when I was 10 and we drove all the way to Lake Michigan in that terrible storm?" he asked during one clear moment, his voice barely audible. "Oh, how could I forget?" I laughed softly. The windshield wipers broke halfway there, and Callum had to lean out the window to see. "And you kept telling him to be careful, but you were laughing so hard you could barely get the words out." His smile was weak, but real. "I was so scared, but then I saw you laughing, and suddenly it was an adventure instead of a disaster." Moments like these were gifts, small treasures I collected and held close during the long stretches when Thaddeus slept, his breathing growing more laboured with each passing hour. Thaddeus passed peacefully 3 days later at dawn, with Weston and me by his side, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the Venetian blinds. His final words were so faint I had to lean close to hear them. "The lake house," he whispered. "Take the grandkids there someday. Tell them about the time I caught that huge bass in '83 and Dad didn't believe me until he saw it." "I will," I promised, knowing he meant Weston's children who called him Uncle Thaddeus and sent him crayon drawings he kept pinned to his office bulletin board. I felt the exact moment he left us, not through any dramatic sign, but through the sudden absence that filled the room. It wasn't the machines registering his passing that told me he was gone. It was the emptiness where his spirit had been just seconds before, and I laid my head on his chest one last time and whispered, "Rest now, my beautiful boy. Dad's waiting for you." The days following Thaddeus's death passed in the strange fog that accompanies profound grief. I moved through the rituals of death, the funeral home arrangements, the service planning, the endless phone calls to distant relatives and colleagues, with a detached precision that somehow kept me functioning. Weston stayed at my house, making coffee each morning and ensuring I ate at least something at regular intervals. "You fed all of us through every crisis in college," he said when I protested his care. "Thaddeus used to say your chicken soup could cure anything, from a broken heart to quantum physics confusion. Let me return just a fraction of that care." Clayton handled the legal notifications and managed the uncomfortable task of communicating with Freya, who had requested a private viewing at the funeral home separate from the one for family and close friends. I didn't object. In fact, I found I lacked the energy to feel anything about her at all. The white-hot anger that had fueled me during those confrontational days had burned away, leaving nothing but ash and exhaustion in its wake. The reading of Thaddeus's will took place 2 weeks later in Clayton's office. Freya arrived with her own attorney, a sharp-featured man who seemed uncomfortable making eye contact. She had traded her designer handbag for a more subdued one, her makeup minimal, her expression appropriately somber. What she didn't know, what none of us had known until Clayton revealed it, was that Thaddeus had updated his will just 3 months after his diagnosis, long before the tensions with Freya had escalated. "My client anticipated that grief might lead to confusion about his wishes," Clayton explained clinically. "He therefore took steps to ensure absolute clarity." The will was devastatingly specific. Freya would retain their primary residence and a reasonable portion of Thaddeus's retirement accounts, but the lake house remained in my name, with a trust established to maintain it for Weston's children's use. Thaddeus's collections, the first edition literature books we'd hunted for at garage sales throughout his childhood, the vintage fishing gear from his grandfather were left to the University Library and local historical society, respectively. Most significantly, a separate medical trust had been established for my ongoing care, with oversight not by Freya, but by the financial advisor who had managed Callum's life insurance policy for the past 3 decades. But the true turning point came when Clayton withdrew a final document from his portfolio. "In the event that attempts were made to isolate Opal Winston from Thaddeus during his final illness," he read formally, "this addendum directs that the executor shall engage a forensic accountant to review all financial transactions from the date of diagnosis forward." Freya's attorney shifted uncomfortably. "My client has cooperated fully. After being confronted with evidence," Clayton interjected smoothly, "the forensic review has already begun, focusing particularly on the $42,000 wire transfer to a Cayman Islands account on April 18th and the liquidation of specific investments earmarked for Opal's supplemental care." The room went utterly silent. Freya stared at the conference table. "I was going to pay it back," she said finally. "It was just temporary for a business opportunity." "With Hayes Lehman's development company?" Clayton asked. "The same company that mysteriously believed they had a verbal agreement to purchase lakefront property you didn't own?" When the meeting concluded, I found myself alone in the elevator with Freya, an uncomfortable silence stretching between us. As the doors opened to the lobby, she finally spoke. "I did love him, you know," she said, not meeting my eyes. "It just got complicated. The money, the stress." I looked at this woman, younger than me by decades, but somehow smaller in this moment, and felt an unexpected absence of anger. Not forgiveness, exactly, but something adjacent to it. "Thaddeus loved you," I said simply. "That's the tragedy in all of this." In the months that followed, I reclaimed not just my legal rights, but my sense of purpose. The lake house that Freya had tried to sell became a gathering place again. I hosted Weston's family for summer weekends, teaching his children to fish from the same dock where Thaddeus had caught his first sunfish at age 6. I volunteered 3 days a week at the hospital patient advocacy office, reviewing communication protocols and sometimes simply sitting with elderly patients who had no visitors. "You've got a gift for it," Maxine told me when she suggested the role. "You know what it's like from both sides now." On my kitchen table at home sat a project I'd been working on. A leather-bound book filled with photographs and stories from Thaddeus's life, created for Weston's children so they would know the uncle who had loved them. The same detailed record-keeping that Freya had mocked now preserved Thaddeus's legacy in carefully labelled photographs, preserved concert tickets, and handwritten memories. Looking back now, I recognise the warning signs I missed. The subtle shifts in how Freya spoke about family obligations, the way she gradually isolated Thaddeus from his oldest friends, her increasing interest in financial matters she'd previously ignored. For those of you facing similar situations, trust your instincts, document everything, conversations, incidents, financial discussions, with dates and details. Our generation's habit of keeping careful records isn't outdated, it's protection. Create copies of important documents and store them in multiple locations. Share your concerns with trusted friends who can provide perspective and witness your experiences. Remember that needing help doesn't mean surrendering control. Legal advocates, financial advisors, and medical patient representatives exist specifically to protect your interests when others try to dismiss your voice. Most importantly, understand that family obligation doesn't require accepting mistreatment. We raised our children to be strong, independent adults. We deserve the same respect we taught them to show others. As Callum used to say, giving someone your love doesn't mean giving them your dignity. Those words guided me through my darkest moments. When that hospital door closed in my face, I felt powerless. But that sealed letter reminded me that dignity isn't given by others. It's something we claim for ourselves, sometimes quietly, sometimes boldly. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and share it with another woman who needs to be reminded of her worth today. Subscribe to Her Silver Truth for more stories of women refusing to be erased after decades of sacrifice. What would you have done? Confronted Freya when you first noticed those missing photographs? Or chosen my path of documentation and strategic patience? Would you have made that final call offering reconciliation? Or pursued justice without compromise? Share your wisdom below. Our generation wasn't raised to demand attention. We were taught to accommodate, to make peace, to put others first. But we didn't survive recessions and invisible labour to be dismissed in our golden years. Like the records in my journal, our stories deserve to be preserved, not erased. These stories matter because you matter. Your strategic patience isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Be sure to check out the next video on screen for another journey of transformation. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.